So I've had the privilege of being a part of a lot of conversations over the past week and a half, and one of the questions that keep coming up is why is atheism spreading as fast as it is? You know, why is atheism seeming to spread at this moment like wildfire? And you know, even asking that question, it means that we're acknowledging that there's something does seem kind of different at this time, and that could be totally culturally, socially. It just could be a different thing for the U.S., could be a different thing for the Southern U.S., whatever. But for whatever reason, it does feel different, and so I did kind of want to acknowledge this a little bit because I have put some thought into it. And I think to even understand this question, we have to understand the socio-cultural and historical context from which atheism springs. To be clear, atheism has always existed through human civilization, but it is only in the recent decades that it's had the freedom or the safety to exist as socially acceptable in wider circles, in wider relevant circles at that. I'd like to share my understanding of that context to perhaps provide a plausible answer to the question of why atheism now seems to be spreading and more people seem to be warming up to the idea. So let's kind of start with the earliest forms of religion. The earliest forms of religion that we can find, and there could be earlier forms even still, but the earliest forms that we can find now is totemism and animism, which is just basically this belief in external spirits. And so it's this idea almost that everything was spiritual. So when the winds blow, something spiritual is happening there, or everything was supernatural, rather. That's probably a better word. So when the trees rustle, that's a supernatural event. When it rains, that's a supernatural event. When famine comes, that's a supernatural event. And so on and so on and so on. If a bug lands on your shoulder, that's a supernatural event. And it's so funny because we are, as a species, greatly far removed from that place. But I know there's still places, especially in the Black community, where you can still find the residue of animism and totemism. Specifically when someone says if you see a bluebird or a red bird, you're supposed to kiss it for good luck. That's a manifestation of animism, of totemism. Even the way preachers preach many times with that preacher's growl, and I'm a former preacher, so I know a little something about that. That preacher's growl is a form of animism, but that's not what this video is about. But the earliest forms of religions are these forms of totemism and animism, where everything was supernatural and everything is controlled by a variety of supernatural or external spirits that you could petition for assistance and things of that nature, but who were by far and large sort of indifferent to you without your specific petitioning of them. Early human society saw spirits in every aspect of the natural world, from trees and rivers to animals and celestial bodies. The externalization of spirituality into the environment likely served as a way for us to make sense of the natural phenomenon and its impact on human life, which you've heard me talk about before if you've seen me on other interviews. That there was a point in time, there was a point in history where some of the things that we believe today would have been appropriate believing then. Not appropriate because it was true, but appropriate because we did not yet have the tools or the time to know any better. Now we do. All right, so we then shifted from this idea of seeing external spirits and everything into seeing external gods in some things. And so this is our shift from totemism and animism to polytheism. And in this, we no longer see everything as supernatural, but we still do have this belief that most things are supernatural. And so if you're paying attention here, just within these two leaps, what we're watching is sort of while we're watching the sociological evolution of religion, we're also watching a recession of theism at the same time, because we go from believing that everything is being impacted and inspired by many different ghosts to believing in less ghosts by the time we get to polytheism. And so The evolution to external gods who control the environment marks a shift towards organizing these external spirits into a more structured pantheon, often with hierarchies and specific domains. And the study of pantheons of God is just absolutely fascinating to me, which of course you're already familiar with through Greek and Roman mythology, but Egyptian mythology has pantheons, Aruba mythology has pantheons, and believe it or not, Hebraic mythology has pantheons, typically a part of the Canaanite mythology. But I digress. And these gods are typically attached to stuff like weather, fertility, war, and love. And again, just pointing out how even though the majority of us, especially in this Western context, have moved on from the polytheistic view, you still find the residue of this, especially in my community. So of course it started off, like things like you got the god of love, or the goddess of love, like Aphrodite. But then even still in communities, I know even when I was growing up, there were people who still believed in love potions, which meant that you believed that love was a supernatural event. And there are people today who would still argue that love is supernatural. So we'll go on from there. But this development reflects increasing social complexity and the need for more centralized forms of control and explanation. And so we see, even with this jump, there is a natural kind of explanation of it. And it definitely, our view of the world seems to become less superstitious as our understanding of the world increases. And so we then move from external gods and polytheism to an external God and monotheism. Again, now the whole world didn't make this shift, of course, because there are still polytheistic faiths out there. But by the same token, I've also demonstrated that there is still polytheistic behavior among monotheists, and there's still totemistic and animistic behavior among monotheism. Yeah. So it doesn't. What we're speaking here to is the majority, or the mainstream, or the next evolution is probably the best way to say that. So that next evolution was monotheism, kind of coming out of Egypt, as we can see with the Aten. But it was a major shift, literally one God away from atheism. Can you see that? We went from believing that everything was all these different gods to believing that, nope, there's just this set number of gods, maybe 12, maybe 24, maybe 36, whatever. But there's this set number of gods, and these other things are just natural coincidence. And then we move to, nope, there is one God, and the other gods are false gods. The other gods are superstition. And now there's just one thing that's responsible for all of the supernatural things. And anything that's happening that's not caused by that one God is superstition. So by this moment, the idea that some of these beliefs are superstitious becomes acceptable among our society. But at the same time, we're still latching on to some of it. Again, just one God away from atheism. Now, the eventual movement towards monotheism with a single external God connected to or in control of the universe signifies a further abstraction and unification of divine concepts, paralleling the centralization of political power in many societies. And I know it was a mouthful. It's how I do my notes sometimes. I'm sorry. But the big point is there, again, just like with polytheism, by the time we're getting to monotheism, we're our religions, wherever you find us, are mirrors of who we are and who we are becoming at that time. Okay. And that's what you see. So even when you see the most disastrous and dangerous things in our religious belief systems, those things are there as our way of justifying those disastrous and dangerous things that we were doing, right? I'm not saying it was right. I'm saying this is the reality of what we as a species were doing. Okay, so, and God, this is good. So discovery of certain specifics of the universe finally allowed us to reasonably entertain the possibility of being on our own in this pale blue dot. The more we've learned about the natural world, the further we have removed theistic involvement from it. And as a result, the idea of God shifts from a preoccupation with the being of active agency to a preoccupation with an inner voice. And so that next evolution from that external God and that monotheism, it was that evolution into an internal God, a personal God. As one of the gospel singers, Tone, said, a personal Jesus. Perhaps that has been the one of the most loudest and one of the most vocal movements, at least of Christianity, but even with other monotheistic religions, is this idea of a God who is not necessarily seen in the active world, but a God who is leading you to be the activity. It's this personal God. In the Christian faith, it was this idea that you are the body of Christ, right? And that you would be the arms and the legs and the mouth and the ears and the brain, whatever. So that you would be these things because, as Mary said, it was the God in you, right? And so this allows us to get to this place where we begin to internalize the divine. And so then self becomes a participant with the supernatural. So then supernatural things happen because people do things. So almost, at least in my context, again, I do my best not to speak for everybody else's, but at least from my context, when you get people who say, hey, God paid my bill, in every single situation, it was somebody that actually paid their bill that they just took the credit from. In every single situation, there has never been a situation of God manifesting money to do something for anybody, to do anything. But every single time those people who take those internal beliefs, it now becomes whatever people do, I will now give God the credit for that. No wonder relationships are in such ill repair in my community. So, the transition to an internal God represented a significant philosophical and theological shift, emphasizing personal connection and the indwelling of the divine within the individual. Again, self becomes a participant with the supernatural. But then this most recent evolution, and again, this is not saying that atheism has not always been with us. This is saying this most recent evolution sociologically has created a climate where atheists can be more accepted, right? And this is where the supernatural literally fades from relevance. And at this moment, we've moved from external spirits to external gods to an external God to an internal God, a personal God, to now it's just self. And then this is the place where we evolve enough sociologically to recognize that the voice we've been following the whole time has been our own. That this whole time, all of this scripture has just been coming from people. And then the voices in people's heads have also just been people. And so atheism then, when you kind of look at it that way from a sociological perspective, seems to simply just be the next step of natural progression. Remember, there was a time when totemism and animism were new to the human species and were spreading like wildfire. And then there was a time where polytheism was spreading like wildfire. So much so that all of the major cultures were in on it. It was the latest rage. And then there was a time where monotheism became the next latest rage and began to spread like wildfire. Atheism is now at that same place. And as with all of the phases that came before, atheism is simply our natural response to an elevated understanding of the world around us. And to me, that's my 2 cents on why atheism is spreading like wildfire.